That night on the America's Got Talent stage, a father said, "I had to wait until tonight." And Simon Cowell completely broke down. The cameras were rolling. The audience was settling into their seats. Another Tuesday night audition in Los Angeles. Another lineup of hopeful performers waiting backstage. Another evening where Simon Cowell would sit at the judge's desk with his arms crossed, ready to deliver the kind of brutally honest critiques that had made him a television legend. Everything was routine. Everything was expected. Until a man walked onto the stage carrying a framed photograph. His name was Michael Harris. 47 years old. Salt and pepper hair. Simple button-down shirt and dark jeans. He looked nervous, hands trembling slightly as he held both the microphone and the photograph, like he wasn't sure which one mattered more. Host Terry Crews greeted him with his usual enthusiasm. "Welcome to America's Got Talent! Tell us about yourself, Michael." Michael looked down at the photograph in his hands, then up at the judges, then directly at Simon Cowell. "I'm here," Michael said, his voice already thick with emotion, "because I made a promise to my daughter. And tonight is the night I finally get to keep it." Simon's expression shifted. That skeptical, slightly bored look replaced by something sharper. Attention. The other judges leaned forward. The audience went quiet. "What kind of promise?" Simon asked. Michael's eyes filled with tears. "I promised her I would sing on this stage. But I had to wait. I had to wait until tonight. Until this exact date." "Why?" Simon's voice was softer now. "Because," Michael's voice broke. "5 years ago today, my daughter Emma died. She was 12 years old. Brain cancer. And her dying wish was that I audition for this show. But she made me promise something. She made me promise I wouldn't come here until the 5th anniversary of her death," she said. He stopped, composing himself. "She said she wanted me to have time to heal first. To remember her with joy instead of just pain." The studio fell into absolute silence. Simon stopped the show. No one knew what was happening. Simon's hand went up, not the dismissive gesture he used to cut off bad auditions, but something gentler. A request for pause. The cameras kept rolling, but everyone in the theater understood that something profound was unfolding. "Michael," Simon said, and his voice carried none of its usual edge. "Tell us about Emma." Michael looked at the photograph in his hands, then held it up so the cameras could see. A young girl with bright eyes and a radiant smile, wearing a hospital gown but grinning like she owned the world. "Emma was diagnosed when she was 9, Michael began. "We did everything: surgery, chemo, radiation, experimental treatments. For 3 years we fought. And she was so brave. Braver than I ever could have been. She never complained. Never asked why me? She just kept living. Kept smiling. Kept making everyone around her feel like life was still beautiful even when it was so hard." Heidi Klum was crying openly. Howie Mandel's jaw was clenched tight. Sofia Vergara had her hand over her heart. Simon sat completely still, his eyes locked on Michael. "She loved this show," Michael continued. "Every Tuesday night, even when she was so sick she could barely keep her eyes open, we'd watch America's Got Talent together in her hospital room. She'd tell me about every performer. Who she thought would win. Who deserved the golden buzzer. And she'd always say, 'Dad, you should audition. You have a beautiful voice.' But I always said no. I was too scared. Too worried about what people would think." He paused, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. 3 weeks before she died, she made me promise. She said, 'Dad, when I'm gone, I want you to audition for AGT. I want you to stand on that stage and sing. But don't go right away. Wait 5 years. Give yourself time to remember me happy, not just sick. And then go sing for me.'" Michael looked directly at Simon again. "Today is 5 years. To the day. I kept my promise. I'm here." Simon's hands were gripping the edge of the judge's desk. His knuckles were white. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "What are you going to sing for us?" "Her favorite song," Michael said. "She used to sing it to herself in the hospital. Even at the end. Especially at the end." Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this performance is still ahead. Michael placed the photograph carefully on a small stand at the back of the stage. He positioned it so Emma's face was looking out toward the audience, toward the judges, toward the cameras that would carry this moment to millions of people. Then he stepped back to center stage, closed his eyes, and began to sing. The song was "Somewhere Over the Rainbow." Not the original version, but the gentle, ethereal arrangement that had become famous in recent years. Michael's voice was rich and warm, filled with a father's love and a grief that had spent 5 years transforming from raw agony into something almost like peace. He wasn't a professional singer. His technique wasn't perfect. There were moments where his voice cracked with emotion. But none of that mattered. Because what was happening on that stage transcended talent. It was a father keeping a promise to his dead daughter. It was love made audible. Simon's hands slowly moved from the desk to his face, covering his mouth. Tears began streaming down his cheeks. Simon Cowell, the judge who had made a career of maintaining icy composure, was crying openly on live television. The other judges weren't even trying to hide their tears. Howie had his head in his hands. Heidi was sobbing. Sophia was whispering prayers in Spanish. The audience was a sea of tissues and tear-stained faces. Michael sang the final verse. The one about troubles melting like lemon drops and dreams coming true, and his voice broke completely on the last line. But he finished it. For Emma. He finished it. The final note faded into silence. For 5 full seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The studio existed in a pocket of absolute stillness, like the whole world was honoring what had just occurred. Then Simon Cowell stood up. He didn't just stand. He walked out from behind the judge's desk. Something he almost never did during auditions, and moved toward the stage. The other judges watched in shock. Terry Crews stepped back, giving Simon space. The cameras followed every step. Simon climbed onto the stage itself. Backstage, producers were begging him to continue, but he didn't. Michael stood frozen, tears streaming down his face, microphone still clutched in his trembling hand. Simon walked directly to him and stopped just a few feet away. "Michael," Simon said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "I need you to understand something. I've been doing this show for years. I've seen thousands of auditions. Incredible singers. Brilliant performers. People with more talent than I could ever properly describe." He paused, his own voice breaking. "But what you just did, that wasn't just a performance. That was a father honoring his daughter's memory. That was love in its purest form. That was you showing Emma, and everyone watching. That promises matter. That grief doesn't have to destroy us. That 5 years of healing can turn pain into something beautiful." Michael's legs almost gave out. Simon reached forward and steadied him, one hand on his shoulder. "Your daughter was right to make you wait," Simon continued. "Because if you had come here 5 years ago, you would have been singing from a place of pure pain. But tonight you sang from a place of love. Of memory. Of promise kept. And that's something that transcends any technical vocal ability." Simon turned to look at the other judges. At Howie, who was nodding through his tears. At Heidi, who had her hand over her heart. At Sophia, who was mouthing, "Yes, yes, yes." Then Simon walked to the photograph of Emma on its stand at the back of the stage. He knelt down beside it, looking at the image of the young girl with the bright smile. "Emma," Simon said, speaking directly to the photograph while millions watched. "Your dad kept his promise. And you were right about him. He does have a beautiful voice. But more importantly, he has a beautiful heart. The kind of heart that waits 5 years because his daughter asked him to. The kind of heart that turns grief into art. The kind of heart that makes the rest of us remember why we do this show in the first place. He stood up and walked back to Michael, who was openly sobbing now, barely able to stand. I'm going to do something I don't do very often, Simon said. And I'm going to do it not because you're the most technically perfect singer we've ever heard, but because some moments are bigger than talent competitions. Some moments are about honoring promises and celebrating love and showing the world that beauty can emerge from the darkest grief. Simon turned and walked to the judge's desk. His hand hovered over the golden buzzer for just a moment. Then he slammed it down. But what happened next, no one in the theater, or watching at home, could ever forget. Golden confetti exploded across the stage. The audience leaped to their feet, screaming, crying, applauding with the kind of fervor usually reserved for championship victories. But this wasn't about winning. This was about witnessing something sacred. Michael fell to his knees on the stage, his hands covering his face as he sobbed. The golden confetti rained down around him, covering his shoulders, his hair, the photograph of Emma that sat behind him. Simon didn't return to his desk. He stayed on the stage, kneeling beside Michael, one arm around the grieving father's shoulders. Terry Crews joined them, then Howie climbed onto the stage, then Heidi, then Sophia. All of them surrounding Michael in an embrace that wasn't about television or performance or entertainment. It was about human connection in its rawest form. The cameras captured everything. The tears. The embrace. The way Michael kept looking back at Emma's photograph as if checking to make sure she could see this moment. The way Simon Cowell, the judge known for his harsh critiques and emotional distance, held a stranger while he cried and told him his daughter would be proud. After the confetti stopped falling, after Michael could finally breathe again, Simon helped him to his feet and walked him to the photograph. Together they lifted it from its stand. "This belongs with you always," Simon said quietly, helping Michael hold the frame. "And Emma. Emma is here. She was here for every note. I promise you that." Michael nodded, clutching the photograph to his chest. The show went to commercial. But before the cameras cut away, Simon did one more thing. He removed his own watch, an expensive piece he'd worn for years, and handed it to Michael. "Time is precious," Simon said simply. "You spent 5 years honoring your daughter's wish. This is to remind you that those 5 years of healing mattered. That the wait was worth it. That promises kept are more valuable than any prize we could ever offer. Share and subscribe, so this story will never be forgotten." 6 months later, Michael released a charity single of "Somewhere Over the Rainbow," with all proceeds going to pediatric brain cancer research. The song reached #1 on iTunes. Emma's photograph was on the cover, the same photograph that had sat on the AGT stage that night. Simon attended the charity launch event personally. He spoke about how that audition had changed something fundamental and how he approached judging. "I realized," he told the crowd, "that some performances aren't meant to be critiqued. They're meant to be witnessed, honored, remembered." The watch Simon gave Michael became something more than a timepiece. Michael wore it every day, and whenever someone asked about it, he'd tell them Emma's story. He'd tell them about the promise, and the 5-year wait, and the night when Simon Cowell proved that even the toughest exterior can hide the most generous heart. On every anniversary of Emma's death, Michael returns to that AGT stage, not to perform, but to sit in the audience and watch other people chase their dreams. Simon always saves him a seat. They never talk about it publicly. But those who work on the show know. Every year, on that same date, Michael Harris sits in the front row with Emma's photograph on his lap, and Simon Cowell makes sure he's there. The frame that held Emma's photograph that night now sits in the AGT trophy room, alongside golden buzzer plaques and show memorabilia. Below it, a small inscription reads, "For Emma Harris, who taught us that some promises are worth waiting for. And for her father Michael, who showed us that love never dies, it just transforms into something even more beautiful." That audition changed AGT forever. Producers now build space into every season for moments that transcend competition. Simon judges differently, still honest, still direct, but with a deeper understanding that behind every audition is a human story that deserves respect. And sometimes, late at night after taping ends, crew members say they can hear Simon in the empty theater, standing where Michael stood, looking at where Emma's photograph had been, reminding himself why this work matters. Because that night, a father kept a promise. And in doing so, he reminded everyone watching that the most powerful performances aren't always about perfection. Sometimes they're simply about showing up when you said you would, carrying love forward through grief, and honoring the people who believed in us even when we didn't believe in ourselves. Emma's wish came true. Her father sang on that stage. And in the process, he gave millions of people permission to transform their own pain into something beautiful.